So now you know the exam structure, how it's scored, and exactly what's out of scope that lets you allocate your study time ruthlessly. But before we dive into building agents, we need to answer a harder question: do you actually need one? This module gives you the decision framework. You'll classify systems as agent, workflow, or conversational, pick the simplest approach that solves the problem, and write the justification an architect would stand behind. Let's start with the first classification. By the end of this module, you can classify 5 systems as agent, workflow, or conversational, solve a problem with the least machinery that suffices, and write the justification an architect would defend. Here is how this module builds up. The 3 shapes are defined by who chooses the next action. In a workflow, you wrote every step and every branch. The sequence is fixed, and the system is deterministic. Adding a model, tool calls, or a retry loop does not change that; the control flow is still yours. In an agent, the model decides what to do next based on what it has just learned. The plan emerges during the run. A conversational system holds no plan at all, it answers one turn at a time. The distinction people get wrong is confusing task difficulty with agency. A hard task can still be a workflow if you can write the sequence in advance. Misclassifying the shape breaks systems in production. If you build an agent where a workflow would do, you pay for every decision the model makes. You get latency, higher cost, and unpredictability; the model might choose a path you never intended. If you force a workflow onto a task that genuinely needs agency, you get a brittle system that fails the moment it hits a case you did not enumerate. The invoice extractor with a retry loop is the classic example. Building it as an agent adds cost and risk for no benefit, because every branch was already known. Getting this wrong in an architecture decision means runaway loops, ballooning token spend, or a system that silently does the wrong thing. Take System 4, the invoice extractor. It extracts 12 fields, validates them, retries on failure, then posts to the ledger. At first glance, it looks agentic. It has a model, tool calls, error handling, and a loop. But work through it. The retry condition is a rule you wrote: if validation fails, try again. The model is not deciding to retry, your code is. Every branch in this system was written by a human in advance. There is no point where the model chooses an action you did not anticipate. That makes it a workflow. The alternative, calling it an agent, loses because it would add decision latency and cost for a path that is already deterministic. The other 4 cases are on the page. The same test applies to each. The durable rule is one question: can I write the whole sequence down in advance? If yes, it is a workflow, however sophisticated each step is. If no, because the subtasks emerge from the work itself, you have an agent. Ignore how hard the task is. Ignore whether a model is involved. Those are distractions. When you are tempted to call something an agent because it has a loop or tool calls, ask who wrote the branch. If you did, it is a workflow. Rejecting the agent label here is not pedantry, it is because an agent would add decision latency, cost, and unpredictability for a path that is already deterministic. That is the reason, and it is what keeps your architecture clean. On the exam, expect a scenario that looks like System 4, a model, a loop, tool calls, error handling. The distractor answer will call it an agent because the task seems hard or because a model is involved. That is the trap. The correct answer is workflow, and the justification is that every branch was written by a human. You will also see questions that ask you to classify multiple systems, and the wrong options will cite task difficulty or model presence as the reason. Remember, the test is always who chooses the next action, not how impressive the step is. The concept is proportionate intervention, the change that addresses the root cause at the lowest cost. It is not about always picking the tiniest tweak. It is about matching the fix to the failure. The distinction people get wrong is treating all symptoms the same. A tool selection ambiguity is fixed by clarifying descriptions, not by adding a classifier. But a financial control that must hold every time is fixed by a code gate, not by a stronger prompt. The line is drawn by reversibility and consequence. Without this discipline, production systems accumulate unnecessary machinery. A routing classifier in front of the model adds latency and cost for a problem that clearer tool descriptions solve. A larger context window for a multi-file review buys capacity but not attention, so findings remain shallow. And the worst failure, relying on a prompt to guarantee a financial control. When that inevitably fails, the cost is real money and lost trust. The exam tests whether you can see the cheap fix first, and whether you know when cheap is dangerous. Let us work through symptom 1. The agent picks the wrong one of two similar tools about a third of the time. The root cause is not a lack of intelligence, it is ambiguous tool descriptions. The smallest fix is to rewrite those descriptions so each states its inputs, outputs, and when to use it rather than the other. The over-engineered option you reject is a routing classifier in front of the model. Why does it lose? Because it adds a whole new component, with its own cost and latency, to solve a problem that clearer language already solves. It bypasses the language understanding you are already paying for. The other three symptoms follow the same pattern, and you can find them in the document. The durable rule is this: for any symptom, first identify the root cause. Then write the smallest fix that addresses it, and name the over-engineered option you are rejecting with the reason it loses. A routing classifier loses because it adds cost without fixing the ambiguity. A larger context window loses because it buys capacity, not attention. And always check reversibility and consequence. If the action is irreversible, like a refund, the cheap prompt-shaped option is the wrong one. That is the line. This is testcraft. The exam will present scenario-based questions where the attractive wrong answer is often a classifier, a larger model, or a multi-agent topology. The distractor that catches people is overcorrecting into always choosing the smallest option. Case 2: the refund without verification is deliberately placed to trap that instinct. When you see an irreversible action, the correct answer is the code-level guarantee, not the prompt tweak. Expect to be tested on that distinction repeatedly. A design justification is a committed argument for one architectural decision under the stated constraints. It is not a survey of options or a balanced description of the trade-off space. It names the specific constraint from the brief that decides the choice, not a general principle, and it rejects the strongest alternative, not a straw one. The distinction people get wrong is thinking that showing thoroughness by listing every option earns marks. It does not. The format always has one best answer, and the justification must defend why that answer wins. Without this discipline, architects ship systems with unresolved trade-offs. They describe the space but never commit, and the team builds to a vague consensus that collapses under a specific constraint. In production, that looks like a system that works in the demo but fails on a real brief, because the constraint that should have decided the architecture was never named. The cost is rework, missed deadlines, and a design that no one can defend to a compliance team. Naming the constraint, the rejected alternative, and the accepted cost forces the decision into the open where it can be tested. Take one of your answers from step 2. Write it as a 6-line defense. Line 1, decision, what you are doing. Line 2, because, the constraint in the brief that decides it. Not a general principle, but a specific constraint like a refund is irreversible. Line 3, rejected, the strongest alternative, not a straw one. Line 4, because, what that alternative ignores. Line 5, cost, what you gave up, with a unit where possible, latency, tokens, and added failure mode. Line 6, wrong if, the fact that would change your mind. Then hand it to a colleague and have them argue the rejected option. If you cannot answer, the constraint was not the real reason. The rest of the cases follow the same pattern. The durable rule is this: every architectural decision must be defended with a named constraint from the brief, a rejection of the strongest alternative, and a stated cost. This is true outside any exam and useful in a system built next year. When you reject an option, give the reason it loses, not just the rejection. Rejecting a routing classifier, for example, loses because it bypasses the language understanding you are paying for. That is the reasoning that holds up in a design review. And always give the falsifier, the fact that would change your mind. Without it, you have a preference, not a design. This is testcraft. The exam trap is listing the options without choosing between them. It reads as thoroughness and scores as nothing because the format always has one best answer. Describing the trade-off space is the commonest way to spend 2 minutes and gain no mark. The 6-line defense is the structure that forces you to commit, name the constraint, and reject the strongest alternative, exactly what the exam rewards. Practice it until it becomes automatic. Let's lock in 3 takeaways. First, a loop alone does not make a system an agent. Second, always pick the simplest architecture that meets the requirements. Third, an architect's justification must commit to one choice. These will save you from the most common mistakes.